Popular public school teacher apparently fired for tweeting, quote, "Trump is our president," unquote. The truth to a public school administrator is like a wooden stake to a vampire. It reduces blood-sucking monsters to irrelevant piles of dust. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we're talking about a popular Michigan social studies teacher who was recently fired, apparently, simply for acknowledging that Donald Trump is the president of the United States and we should support him. According to the story, at least the first initial version of the story, he was called into the office. He was told that this, what was he thinking for doing this? How dare he? And that he would learn his fate shortly, and then he found out he was terminated from the school. Since then, in the 24 hours since we last mentioned this story, the superintendent says that the meeting that Mr. Kucera, the fired teacher, had never really took place. So we don't know for sure what's happening here, but clearly the fact that this social studies teacher was not reflexively anti-Trump and dared to say it triggered something at that school that wasn't good.
Yeah, so what we have is the social studies teacher, and he's a varsity baseball coach. His name is Justin Kucera, and he's from Walled Lake School District. And this is near Detroit, not too far away here, in Michigan. And so, according to him, he says that officials hauled him into a closed-door meeting after he indicated his support for President Trump's speech to reopen schools. So he tweeted out, "I'm done being silent. President Trump is our president. Don't at me. Don't at me." He got added. Let me tell you.
I was going to say.
He got atted.
If there's one thing he did wrong, it was not to realize they would be atting him all over the place.
I think he was just like, I
didn't care at that point.
Like that. Okay, so he told the Washington Free Beacon the Walled Lake Western principal and the district superintendent gave him an ultimatum: be fired or resign. Quote from Kucera, "I was required to meet with Human Resources, the superintendent, and my principal on July 10th. They initially took my statement on why I tweeted those tweets, and they told me they would have a decision about my future employment in the upcoming days. When they completed the meeting, I was told I had the option to either be fired or resign." Now, as you indicated, according to new reports, the superintendent, Kenneth Gutman, actually commented to Fox Business, and that outlet reported that no disciplinary action was taken as a result of any support of President Trump, and we are unable to comment on specific staff discipline personnel matters. Here's the thing. According to a bunch of other people, various parents that were interviewed, everyone loved this guy, Justin Kucera, as a teacher. And being a social studies teacher, as I was, you could so very easily bring your politics into the classroom. But according to all the parents, at least that were interviewed for this story, they all said he was apolitical in the classroom. He was a great teacher, and he coached my kids' sports, and he was also coached them up in leadership. So for them to say that all of a sudden he's being canned, we don't know what really happened.
Yeah, stories like this, as I've said before, really just butter my buns. I mean, the thing that's
Both
so
buns?
frustrating about this is, first of all, both buns. Yes,
Okay.
both buns. Pillowy soft.
Threw you off a little there.
Pillowy soft. No sesame seeds. But my buns are buttered by stories like this for two reasons. Reasons number one, that Detroit has the worst record of public schools of any major school district in this country. They are so far behind even the worst performing schools. Last I saw, less than 6%. Of Detroit 8th graders could read and do math at an 8th grade level. 6%? And so you're getting rid of a really good teacher potentially because you don't like his politics in Detroit. But the bigger reason this bothers me is, what is the context now of this? Not the intolerance of the school. It is, he was apolitical. He never did bring politics into the classroom. He's not guilty of what you're accusing him of. And this is what drives me nuts. The left is, by definition, political. As a matter of fact, at the end of the story, I'll let you cover that, right? We've got a statement of what some other liberal teachers have been doing at that school, right? Oh. Read them to that. And there are a number of liberal teachers at the school who have been made really snarky anti-Trump commentary in their classroom. They were never, to these students, live to to students, as opposed to on his own private Twitter account. And these teachers were never reprimanded. They were never the least bit called out. What did they say?
Well, first, I'm going to give his statement about this because it shows just in stark contrast to these people. He says that his statement was intended to unify rather than divide. I know a lot of people are just rooting for Trump to fail, and I don't think that anybody should do that. Oh, how dare he? How dare he? We're supposed to, because I don't like him as president, that means I should root for him to fail, which means us as a country fail. Yeah,
and the liberals say, unity means all of us uniting to get rid of conservatives.
Pretty much.
Whereas what he's saying is, let's all unite behind the guy who's elected.
Yes. Well, he also continues, agree with him or not, you should want the president to do well.
Yep.
I apologize that my tweet brought so much negative attention, but I'm not sorry for what I said.
And good for him. Unlike some of those idiots we looked at on yesterday's show, he didn't back down.
True.
But now look, this is apologizing for a private tweet that simply said unity. Right? Listen to what goes on in the classroom elsewise.
So there was Paulette Lowe, who is actually now retired, thankfully. She encouraged students to read an article from The Atlantic about how to beat Trump while still employed. Nicole Estes is a kindergarten teacher in the district and called Trump a sociopath and a narcissist on Facebook in 2016, still employed by the elementary school.
Of course.
And neither of them obviously could be reached for comment because, whoopsie.
So I go back to my point. Whenever conservatives say things that aren't terribly controversial on their own time, this means that they're radical politicians who are trying to brainwash kids. When liberals every single stinking day drag politics into their classroom, when you're teaching a radical sexual curriculum to 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, whether you know it or not, you are participating in a radical left-wing political activism in the schools. That's what they're doing. And so rather than make this about the school's intolerance and shine a light on the double standard here, all the teachers, who liked him, all the family members who loved him as a father, all the kids, he's not political. He's not political in the classroom. Don't fire him because he's not political in the classroom. I mean, you've already surrendered the argument, right? That to be liberally political in the classroom is okay. So we're saying don't fire him because he didn't say bad conservative things in the classroom. We need teachers balancing out the liberal dialogue with some conservative chatter in the schools. And so it just shows you how far down the toilet this has all gone already.
Well, since we talked about toilets, I guess Joe Biden is the next logical person to talk about.
Corn pop!
So at the beginning of the week, Joe Biden, he wasn't actually in his bunker for once, the usual bunker with the books behind him, but he was in view of things that are actually living, unlike himself. He's in front of a garden, which is so nice and pleasant, where he was speaking to the Engage Action's virtual Million Muslim Votes Summit. And this is what he said.
I wish we taught more in our schools about the Islamic faith. I wish we talked about all the great confessional faiths. It's one of the great confessional faiths. And what people don't realize, is one of my avocation is theology, don't realize is that we all come from the same root here in terms of our fundamental basic beliefs.
So did he just say that he wants them to teach faith in the public schools? Did I hear that correctly?
If you take, yes.
Yeah, faith. Not the history of Islam. He wants the faith. And he wants us to teach the confessional faiths, which would include Christianity.
Does he realize? Forbid. Wait, he might not realize that.
And here's my problem with Joe Biden. I'm sorry. This is why I keep asking you, did I hear what I just said? Because show the picture of Joe. Can you show the picture of Joe? Yeah, because every time I see that picture, I cannot help but see a spray paint can. One of those Krylon spray paint cans with being shaken back and forth and that rattling little marble inside. That's all I hear when I see him.
Get away. Don't.
You smell like strawberries. You smell like molasses.
Molasses.
And plastic couch covers. Do you know that the hair on my leg is now tingling? I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
You're doing what's that's never been done before. You're registering and turning out 1 million Muslim voters this November. It matters. Your voice is your vote. Your vote is your voice.
Is your vote, is your voice, vote, voice. Joe Biden.
It's amazing when you stop and think about this. And your voice is your vote, and your vote is your. We're gonna empower 1 million Muslims. Okay, do it.
But here's the thing. Then what he's saying then is he wants that million. He's hoping for all 1 million Muslim voters to be on his side. But are they going to expect the schools to be open then? Like he is saying that he wants the faith in school, but Donald Trump dares say that we should have schools reopen, and yet Joe Biden is over there.
Well,
like, how are you going to have those
what
schools
he basically
be open?
said as part of his platform is that we ought to teach Islamic faith in our schools.
If our schools are open.
And this is the same guy that if you had asked him 1 second after he was done saying that, do you support the teaching of the Christian faith in the schools? Would have said, absolutely not. Can you tell us then what you mean by confessional faith? No, I cannot, even though theology is one of my avocations. There's a word for this, kids. If you are public school educated, you might want to get your online dictionary. The word pander. It's not a bear.
Pander.
Pander. This is pandering.
Is Nancy Pelosi's face right there?
Yeah, that exactly. The poster child
Pelosi pander.
of pandering is Pandora herself.
Well, we're going to go over to Princeton, where the Daily Princetonian, the campus newspaper, ran a story about Princeton University president Christopher Eisgruber and how he's openly condemned a professor, who is Professor Joshua Katz, a professor of classics. I can't believe that man even still has a job. Katz published a column in Quillette, and it criticized the Black Lives Matter movement at Princeton. And basically the whole thing starts off talking, it goes back to, what was that, last week, maybe a week before that, this faculty letter that had been signed by like 350 professors, and then there were students that signed it. So basically everyone's writing these open letters at Princeton. That's how they're spending their time. But the president openly condemned Katz's own column. So basically we're going to start with what Eisgruber said, and then we're going to detail actually what Katz's column says, because obviously there's a disconnect. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. So in a statement, President Eisgruber argued that Katz failed to use his free speech in a responsible manner, and that Katz inappropriately disparaged students that have participated in recent protest efforts on campus. Here's what Eisgruber said. While free speech permits students and faculty to make arguments that are bold, provocative, or even offensive, we all have an obligation to exercise that right responsibly. Joshua Katz has failed to do so, and I object personally and strongly to his false description of a Princeton student group as a local terrorist organization.
Hey, Hans Eisgruber. Hey, Chancellor, Reich's Chancellor.
President.
No, we're going Chancellor. Reich's Chancellor Eisenberger, right? Here's the problem. Have you ever once condemned the irresponsible free speech of those protesters, who basically argue that all of American history is racism, that argue that it's justified to protest by burning and looting? Have you ever once, Herr Chancellor, called out the left for what is a unbroken line of irresponsible free speech going back 10 years? No, you never have. But Professor Katz comes out and says, look, these are the speech patterns. These are the ideological pronouncements of tyrants, right? Yes.
Well, and here's his specific thing where he references what he's getting basically slapped on the wrist for. Katz wrote in his column, the Black Justice League, which was active on campus from 2014 until 2016, was a small local terrorist organization that made life miserable for the many, including the many black students who did not agree with its members' demands. Recently, I watched an Instagram Live of one of its alumni leaders who, emboldened by recent events and egged on by over 200 supporters who were baying for blood, presided over what was effectively a struggle session against one of his former classmates. It was one of the most evil things I have ever witnessed, and I do not say this lightly.
And ironically, in that instance, it's the student group that went after students. Did he defend? Not only did he not criticize the students who were doing this behavior, who were literally verbally, emotionally, intellectually assaulting these other kids, these other poor Princeton kids, he never stuck up for them, and he's not sticking up for Professor Katz now. How dare you, the chancellor says, criticize one of our radical left-wing organizations? I'm going to keep my mouth shut no matter what anybody else suffers, but when you come after our left-wing student groups, you can count on Herr Chancellor to be right there to defend the party orthodoxy. Was he wearing a brown shirt?
I didn't look. He might have.
Is he wearing a brown shirt?
He probably always wears a brown shirt. Well, Katz's column itself, if you want to go read it on Quillette, is a declaration of independence by a Princeton professor. And he basically starts out talking about that faculty letter that was sent. And he said he's friends with, or that they all signed, he's friends with many of the people who signed that letter. And he wrote down basically 4 reasons that they could have signed, but ultimately it comes down to, he says, they pretty much just all did it because they wanted to be allies, and they didn't want to seem like they weren't, hip happening. And he said he's embarrassed for all of them for doing this.
It is embarrassing.
It is embarrassing.
I mean, if you want to know the walking, talking, breathing definition of an empty suit, look at a high-level university administrator. I mean, they're protean chameleons, right? Whoever they're talking to, they'll nod and smile at you. Oh, that's a good idea, but they'll do none of it. Okay. They are completely constructed by the progressive world that surrounds them.
And he even says that basically in his article then. He talks about like the faculty and, some of the unreasonable things that they put out, like the insane things. He says he actually agrees with a lot of them, but there were so many demands in that letter that you're going to find at least one. And he says, one of the insane ones are, rewarding invisible work done by faculty of color with course relief and summer salary.
Right.
He's like, well,
pay professors, if they're minorities, to get credit for work that they don't actually have to do.
Invisible work.
Exactly.
Yeah. But when he talks about getting rid of the police because, defund the police, that's the whole thing. He says, I defy any of my colleagues to argue persuasively that defunding campus police is a good idea, even at idyllic Princeton. I defy anyone who signed the letter, directly or indirectly, to send his or her children to a college or university without campus security. Fantasizing that you can do without the police is the height of arrogant privilege.
Speaking about arrogance, the President Chancellor Eisengruber, he knows that by siding with the radical students, the rest of the student and faculty body is going to support him. Mm-hmm. To stand up for the professor's right to say what he said, or to even perhaps agree with the extremism of what's being demanded by the left, it's a lose-lose game. So that's why we call you are today's Reich Chancellor, sir, because you are not doing this out of principle, because if you were, you would have defended those other Princeton kids who were attacked by this group of students and ex-students, but you didn't do it. You would protect this professor who makes legitimate points about the absurdity of the behavior of the student campus group, but you couldn't do that. You would have damned both their houses if that's how you really felt, but you didn't do it. So you win our empty suit, black shirt, Reich's Chancellor Award of the day. Congratulations, Princeton. You should be so proud. $60,000 a year to serve under this man's Reich ship.
Time now for some real education. Calvin and Hobbes was a comic strip created by cartoonist Bill Watterson, running from 1985 to 1995. Since the end of its run, Calvin and Hobbes has garnered artistic, academic, and philosophical interest. The strip chronicles the antics of Calvin, a mischievous 6-year-old boy, and Hobbes, his animated stuffed tiger. Though the series does not frequently mention specific political figures or contemporary events, it does explore broad issues like environmentalism and public education. At the height of its popularity, Calvin and Hobbes was featured in over 2,400 newspapers worldwide.
Yeah, this is a beautiful cartoon. I mean, it's often considered to be the end of the great classic era of cartoons that started, that Schultz was and Peanuts was a part of. In fact, I would rate Peanuts and Calvin and Hobbes 1A and 1B in terms of, and you know how much I love Peanuts, in terms of they're transcendent. They do with comic strip forms things that it would take other people novels, if not encyclopedias, to accomplish. And go to the picture. There's of Watterson. There's our author there on the left. And the thing about him that's so remarkable is he did 10 years of his comic strip, then quit. And never once did he allow his characters to be monetized. Schultz having been dead for now 22 years. I think Schultz has been dead 22 years now. He is still one of the top 10 money makers, even after having been dead, because of the way that all of the Peanuts characters were marketed. Used for commercials, used for TV, voiceovers, selling products, stuffed animals, all that stuff, greeting cards. Watterson, who could have made billions of dollars after his creation, refused to monetize or to in any way, shape, or form commercialize what he had done. Absolutely remarkable. And while there's so much to talk about in Calvin and Hobbes, I actually taught Calvin and Hobbes in a freshman writing seminar once, learning how to write through Calvin and Hobbes. It was very interesting. The one aspect of Calvin and Hobbes I want to talk about in this instant classic is how ahead of his time Watterson was with regards to educational issues. Many of his cartoon strips dealt with education. Let's take a look at some of them. There you have Calvin sitting at his desk, and here's the question on his exam. Explain Newton's first law of motion in your own words. Exclamation point. Calvin has an idea. And look at the expressiveness of the characters, right? The character. And then he starts to write gibberish. And then he says to the audience, I love loopholes. And go back to the opening panel, right? In your own words. Calvin takes that to mean his own new invented language. And if the teacher comes back to him and says, hey, I'm going to have to fail you on this, he can technically say, that's my language, I spoke it. And how much more would he get away with that in the progressive school systems we now have than what happened in the 1980s? Go to the next one. There he is at that test again. And the question is, when did the Pilgrims land Plymouth Rock? Highly important to what's going on in the world at 1620, right? And then he follows the right answer, the rare right answer that Calvin ever got in school. He followed it up with a little essay. As you can see, I've memorized this utterly useless fact long enough to pass a test question I now intend to forget forever. You've taught me nothing except how to cynically manipulate the system. Congratulations. And then he addresses us, right? They say that the satisfaction of teaching makes up for the lousy pay, right? Go to the next one. Here you have Calvin then and his pet tiger. You know, I don't think math is a science, it's a religion. A religion? Yeah, all of these equations are like miracles. You take two numbers, and when you add them, they magically become one new number. No one can say how it happens, and you either believe it or you don't. And the tiger is puzzled, right? Calvin goes on, this whole book is full of things that have to be accepted on faith. It's a religion. And the tiger says, and in the public schools of all things, call a lawyer. Calvin closes by saying, as a math atheist, I should be excluded from this, right? And there's a lot of truth to this. When you think about how now the argument that you're getting from educrats that 2 + 2 is 5, right? That math is empiricist white supremacy, that math is only what you say it is. This cartoon was really ahead of its time. Give me one more. Here's the dad, Calvin's dad, ever frustrated. Okay, Calvin, let's check over your math homework. Let's not and say we did. Your teacher says you need to spend more time on math. Have a seat. More time? I already spent 10 whole minutes. 10 whole minutes. Wasted. Down the drain. Dad says, you've written here 8 + 4 = 7. Now you know that's not right. So I was off a little bit. Sue me. You can't add things and come out with less than you started with. I can do that. It's a free country. I've got my rights. And the final one? Here they are walking through the snow. Schultz and Watterson did the best snow scenes, right? They just were so good at portraying snow. How are you doing on your New Year's resolutions? The tiger asked the boy. I didn't make any, Calvin said. See, in order to improve oneself, one must have some idea of what's good. That implies certain values. But as we all know, values are relative. Every system of belief is equally valid, and we need to tolerate diversity. Virtue isn't better than vice, it's just different. How freaking prescient is this? At which point the tiger responds, I don't know if I can tolerate that much tolerance. The kid says, I refuse to be victimized by your notions of virtuous behavior. Do you need any more than those 4 panels to sum up the postmodern destruction of our culture? God bless Calvin and Hobbes.
All right, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Don't forget, the Dr. Duke Show is offered on more than a dozen podcast platforms, such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Simply subscribe and consider leaving us that coveted, precious 5-star review to keep the show growing. Now we're going to wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. Now, based on the opening story of the day, Donald Trump is the President of the United States. Bring on the hate mail.
And that's our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie. Until next time, stay educated, my friends.